Former Chief of Police of Riverside, Sergio Diaz has a long and decorated career in law enforcement and as a leader of criminal justice. He rose through the ranks as a police officer for the LAPD for 33 years and served as the Chief of Police for the City of Riverside for 9 years. Chief Diaz is now the External Relations Director for the Robert Presley Center of Crime and Justice Studies. Chief Diaz, we are honored to have you on today.
Thank you, Kevin. It's my pleasure.
So I know our audience wants to get to know you a lot in this episode, so I'm just going to jump straight into it with a very broad and general first question. How and why did you get involved in law enforcement?
Well, the first thing is I wasn't one of those kids growing up always knew I wanted to be a police officer. That didn't really occur to me until I was actually a senior in college, and I had a small part-time job and a girlfriend. And by the way, it's the same girlfriend I have today. We've been married for 44 years. And somebody else, my dad actually told me, hey, the LAPD is hiring and they're looking for bilingual people to be police officers, and yeah, maybe you want to give that a try. By the way, my original educational plan was to become a lawyer. So I thought about it and read some books about policing and such, and it interested me. I applied, and the following year I was accepted. And once I got into it, I had some friends and acquaintances, people from work who were attorneys. And I realized they didn't seem very happy, and I was happy and fulfilled doing my job, so I stuck with it for a little while.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that answer. It's great to hear about how you started and how you got started in such a long career in policing. And so on to the next question. Chief Diaz, what were some of the biggest challenges that you've had to overcome in your career?
Well, I don't, my mind doesn't work that way. I don't keep track of challenges. I mean, with each job, and I was fortunate enough to have many different positions and really lucky to be able to work in all of the major areas of the municipal police department. But in each one, I guess the challenge would just be, learning a new job, learning expectations, learning the culture, which later on, as I got into management, I realized was more and more important than you think. Culture is very, very important. But I think it was just the learning the job, the learning the people, and always trying to rise to the occasion, as it were, to fulfill the demands of the moment.
I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it, not looking at your position in terms of the challenges you face, but rather how you can overcome anything that is put on your table. And so kind of as a follow-up to that, I want to focus specifically on your position as the Chief of Police of Riverside. What were the biggest moments, in your opinion, that you remember most, I guess, as the Chief of Police of Riverside?
Well, without a doubt, it's the deaths of officers that were serving under me. I had been here for approximately 5 months in November of 2010 when Ryan Bonaminio was killed. He was a patrol officer. He was in pursuit of a car theft suspect, and he was killed by that suspect. A few years later, Mike Crane and his partner were also patrol officers, working the midnight shift, and they came under attack by a crazy person who filled the cabin of the police car with bullets fired from a military rifle, and Mike was killed. That was in 2013. So later on, I also had to bury another officer who died of illness. He wasn't murdered. But Corey Oakes was his name. So without a doubt, those are the most impactful things and the things that you remember. But coming, when I started in the Riverside Police Department, it was at a particular moment in the history of the department. All moments are particular, I guess. Everything is important. But at that time, the reason that there was a vacancy for the chief's position is that the prior chief had gotten himself in some trouble relating to his personal behavior, and that was widely reported, and so there was I think a crisis of public confidence in the department, which was by no means the fault of the members of the department, by no means the fault of the working people in the department, but everything gets reflected on the whole body. And so I saw that as a big challenge to regain and retain the trust of the public that we work for.
It's very difficult to hear that there are many aspects to policing, such as the death of officers in this case, that can be very difficult to deal with. And so leading on to another question, as someone who isn't involved in policing in any way myself, there are many aspects to policing that I don't necessarily know or fully understand. And so are there any unique aspects or unique challenges about policing the communities that you have in your career that members of those communities might not be aware of?
That's a really broad question, and I don't even know where to begin. I'll start by noting this. Policing is one of those professions, or we like to think of it as a profession, whether it is or not, it's up for debate, but it certainly is one of those jobs where people believe that they know what's involved. After all, it's policing is the subject of a lot of popular culture. Movies and TV shows and novels and such are written around policing. And some of those, just as happens with any activity, some of those movies and TV shows and novels are more accurate than others. Some are more insightful than others. So there are a lot of aspects that I think the general public doesn't necessarily understand, although everybody has an opinion about policing. So it is more technical, and there's more to it, and there's more intricacy and nuance than you would think if you just were exposed to the popular culture and even the news coverage. The news, of course, is dependent on the exceptional. That's by the nature of journalism. Exceptional cases are reported upon, and so there's kind of a, I don't know if you'd call it cognitive bias or a cognitive predisposition to form a general opinion about the exceptional case. So I don't know if that's clear, and I apologize if it's not, but it is a challenge because people will read about something that is unusual, and they will form the opinion that that's the norm, and they will also form the opinion that based on that exception, we have to develop policies, procedures, training, whatever it happens to be. Those of us who are in the profession know that policy, procedure, training are things that constantly need to be reviewed, but you don't necessarily base those decisions on the exceptional case.
I want to kind of follow up on that. This question is on the same line of what you were just saying, but what would you say is the biggest misconception that you see people make about policing or about police departments in general? Is there like a specific one that stands out, or is it just kind of what you were saying, where there were just a lot of general kind of what you're saying on the cognitive biases, that there are these biases people have on exceptional cases, and based on those, people make these assumptions? Is that kind of the main issue, or do you think there are like outstanding misconceptions that exist that are perpetuated by social media, or maybe by people in office, or maybe by communities in general? or maybe it's like a combination of both?
Well, I think it's a combination, but one thing that I have said for a long, long time, long before the current political and public relations crisis, I try to put myself in the place of an average person who doesn't necessarily know a lot about policing, and I think as I drive by the police station, I would naturally assume, or first of all, I ask myself, I wonder what goes on in there. We don't know. Yeah, as members of the public, you see one side. Usually, when you're getting a traffic ticket, you see one side of what the cops do. But if you were outside and had no particular insight, you would, I think, based on my observations and the things that concern people, I think that you would naturally assume, those people in there, they all see the world the same way. They're probably all conspiring against me, and I'll never really know what they're up to. And not that everybody feels that way. I mean, the police departments are among the institutions in American society that have the highest amount of respect and enjoy a lot of support. But I don't think we're necessarily transparent. Again, if you didn't have regular contact with the police department, you would think, yeah, they're probably all plotting. They're all friends of each other. They all see the world the same way, and they're all trying to figure out how to mess over me. And that's not the case. It's not the case on any of those points. In my experience, most police officers get into the occupation for the right reasons. They generally want to serve people. They generally want to protect people. The police officers have, as a group, have a high protective instinct. They also, by the way, one of the things that attracts people to the occupation is the sense of adventure about it. Even a young person who's realistic and knowledgeable and all that would know that every day is not an adventure. Every day is not a TV show. Every day is not a car chase or a fight. But those things all happen. It's not, you don't go to an office and sit behind a desk and do the same thing today that you did yesterday and can expect to do tomorrow. So I think those are the outstanding traits. The desire to serve, the desire to protect other people, and also welcoming getting the occasional adventure. And I think that's what's often misunderstood or overlooked. Now, as in any group of people, there are a few folks that are in the occupation that don't belong there. I was a manager for a long time, and I was chief for a long time, and I even before I was a chief, when I was in LAPD, much of my career was in and around the internal affairs function, and so I've got a lot of experience at dealing with individuals when they don't follow the rules. So I think I'm pretty realistic about that aspect, and about the importance of enforcing rules, the importance of training, the importance of culture, in short, the importance of leadership. I think I understand those things, and to give myself the benefit of the doubt, I think I understand those things better than lay people, and I don't mind the questions, but I welcome being able to discuss those things with lay people.
I want to ask a follow-up again. I know we've been on this stuff for a while, but I think it's a really interesting topic to talk about, especially with someone with as much experience as you. Are there any policies that you've ever thought about that should be implemented, and vice versa? Are there specific policies you think that maybe should be cut out in terms of things that people in public office talk about? This could be a local, state, even a national level. Is there anything that you've always thought maybe should be implemented or maybe taken out?
Well, I mean, where to start? Where to start? There are a lot of things. Uh, there's certainly a lot of room for improvement in my field. I think we can do a lot of things better. Um, and while I was working, particularly when I was chief here in Riverside, I participated in a lot of community forums and town halls, and uh, where there were these discussions of the way things should be. Uh, and I never liked to give excuses. I didn't. Quite often, I would tell people, "No, you are right. That is something that needs to be changed." And I knew myself why it wasn't changed. But if you go down that road of explaining why things are the way they are, you get into the danger of making excuses. But there are a lot of things. For example, and this has been reported on quite extensively in recent times because of things that have been in the news. As I told you, there are some people that don't belong in policing. On the one hand, it's imperative for police managers to weed folks out, and I said many times when I was chief, look, this is in a sense a family, and in some ways, inside a real family, there may come a time when we ask one of our members to leave. Yeah, you got to leave the house. You can't be part of us anymore, for the good of the house, for the good of all of us, and for your own good. But you don't take any pleasure necessarily in that. And I think it's that way uh, in the disciplinary process. And when somebody has proven that they don't share the value and the cultures, the ethos of the organization, we have to ask them to leave. It's not that easy, though. We live in a democracy. We live in a society where people have rights, organized folks, folks that are unionized and have representatives. They have a whole different set of protections. And here's where I don't want to confuse anyone. I don't want to make excuses for why we can't always clean up our own ranks as quickly and as efficiently as we'd like. But those are real concerns. Now, should police unions exist? I think they definitely should. And I'll give you a reason that nobody talks too much about, and it's maybe because it's a particularly chief of police reason. But you don't want the chief to be able to say, you know what, you're out of here, without any due process and without a public hearing and without any of that stuff. And the reason you don't is because what happens when the mayor comes to the chief and says, you know what, Officer Jones just gave my teenage son a ticket. I want you to get rid of Officer Jones. Well, as it is right now, I would have to say, under any circumstances, I would say, no, we're not doing that. We're not firing somebody because you're the mayor. But I also have the backup of saying, no, it's not that easy to fire somebody. We got to have a hearing. We got to gather evidence. It's going to be public, and you can't do what you want to do, Mr. Mayor. And by the way, that's a complete hypothetical situation, but it's not too far off from reality. And should police officers have the right to bargain for wages and working conditions and all that? Of course. But with those rights comes, the consequence that it's not easy often to get rid of somebody who's proven that they no longer belong. It's not impossible, but it depending on the setup, on the political administrative setup in a particular jurisdiction, the chief might not have the final word. It might be up to some arbitrator, and that, in my view, is a complete disaster. That's a recipe for disaster. That somebody who doesn't have a stake in the outcome can arbitrarily decide on something as important as whether a person is able to remain in office.
Thank you, Chief Diaz, for helping shed kind of some of the light on some areas that either need improvement or have already seen some form of improvement, and kind of shedding light on the aspects of the responsibilities and role of the managers and the chiefs and those high-ranking people within the police system. But now to the other side of the aspect of the ways in which the police can improve. What steps could the public take to help make their communities more safe?
Well, you know, when you ask that question, I think back to part of my fundamental basic training in the police academy was the introduction into the history of policing as we know it in our, you know, in Western civilization, and the history goes back really to the late 19th century England, the London Metropolitan Police that was established by Sir Robert Peel. And Sir Robert Peel had these 9 management principles, and one of them, and they worked themselves into some the same concept works itself through several of these principles. But one of them is the people are the police, and the police are the people. And what he was saying was, we all members of the society have a responsibility for the prevention of crime. It just so happens that the police are that small group of people that's their sole focus. They get paid to do that. But and I hope this response is satisfactory. It's not too general or highfalutin, but essentially the way to you can argue about a lot of things, whether certain measures would lead to more public safety or not, and almost everything that the police do is subject to debate as to whether those are effective means or not. But what we can all do to be safer is to invest more and better in our children. Educated people, accomplished people, what Maslow would call actualized people, are unlikely to be a crime problem to their neighbors and their fellow citizens. So more than anything else, it's not, the police certainly have a strong role in playing in terms of deterrence and prevention and incapacitation of crime, you know, through the penal system. But unfortunately, in our society, families, households are oftentimes little crime factories, because children who are abused, children who are neglected, children who don't get the proper instruction and support and frankly love are likely to become a menace to their neighbors. So, I mean, I hope that's not too long a way to answer your question. Now, aside from that, in terms of the police specific aspect, I think the public can demand more professionalism, more leadership, better training. The public can demand that their elected officials support the police mission, first of all, by supporting law and order themselves. You know, we would hope that you know, we should not be electing criminals to public office, and that should be a basic test. You know, if you talk like a crook and you act like a crook, you don't get to say, well, I'm a supporter of the police. So anyway, I would hope that people apply a lot of judgment and discernment in their political decisions.
I think that's a really interesting and also very clarifying answer, because I think, you know, education gets talked about a lot, especially in recent years. And given what's happened with COVID, I think education has really, you know, jumped up on, you know, our lists of what issues we talk about. But it's usually not in this context, right? It's usually not about how it can actually help make our community safer in the future by investing in our kids and making sure that they, get what they need. But I also thought the other point you made on our elected officials was interesting, and I think it would be really fascinating to hear your thoughts on, not specific officials, but rather what, from the perspective of someone who has such a long career in law enforcement and was also the chief of police for the city of Riverside, what kinds of interactions have you had or experiences have you had, good or bad or maybe neutral, with elected officials? And also, how do police departments, and I know this can differ from location to location, but how do police departments usually deal with elected officials in terms of how often is that something that you have to think about? Is this something that maybe isn't thought about that much, or is it case by case?
It is extremely important and critical. And by the way, in the United States, in our system of government, there are various models. So, for example, you have the model of elected sheriffs, and county sheriffs throughout the United States tend to be elected officials. So, to some degree, there's autonomy from other elected officials, although they have to work together. In municipal police departments, typically, the police chief is appointed by either a city manager or the mayor. So when you ask about my dealings with elected officials, or whether good or bad and so forth, they run the gamut. People are individuals, but I will, give you a little bit of a spoiler alert. Maybe I'll give you some hint into my thinking. I've told people, if my job was simply to run the police department and to deal with the community, I could do that job till I'm 100 years old. I enjoy it. I like it. I know what I'm doing. The worst aspect of my job, to be very frank with you, and I can be very frank because, I'm retired. The worst aspect of my job was dealing with City Hall. For a number of reasons. At the municipal level, especially, in a mid-sized city, people run for public office, and essentially what they're doing in many cases is running to be the chief 311 operator, the person who takes all the phone calls about any community situation that they're unhappy about. And then once they get it, and they campaign very hard to get that position, and then once they get it into office, they want the phone calls to stop. And so there's oftentimes, whatever the social problem, whatever the situation, the condition in the community is that people want to address, there's a limited number of tools that they have to address it. And what it also often happens is that it comes down to, hey, let's have the cops handle it. Let's have the police fix it. So a very salient example would be the issue of homelessness. Now, pretty much anybody that I talk to is disturbed by the topic of the homeless. Some are disturbed because it pains them to see a fellow human being without shelter and in a condition where they obviously need help. So some people come to it from a place of compassion. Others just want those unruly, dirty-looking people who are probably mentally ill. I just don't want to see them. And so then the problem becomes one of, you, the police department, you make this go away, you fix this. Well, my response always was, look, we can deal with the criminal aspects of that. If somebody is committing a crime, we can arrest them. If somebody has committed a crime, we don't catch them, we can investigate the crime. If someone is mentally ill to the point that the California law defines where the state can get involved, that is, that they're a danger to themselves or to other people or gravely disabled, we can deal with that to a certain point. but we can't fix homelessness. We don't have the tools for that. You know, look at, you try to tell people over and over again, look at a police officer. Look at what the tools are that a police officer has. They have a pistol and a taser and pepper spray and handcuffs and their own power of persuasion and their own training and all that. But none of those tools is adequate to solve the issue of homelessness, especially where, as throughout our nation, as it's so inextricably linked with issues of drug addiction and mental health. So that brought me quite often in conflict with elected officials, because I knew from experience. I had lived through many crises in the Los Angeles Police Department, and in my view, many of the worst crises and the things that eventually caused us the most pain was when there was public pressure for the police department to take actions that they were not legally empowered to take. You know, solve a problem no matter what. I don't want to look at it. I don't want to know how you solved it. Just make the problem go away. I never accepted that. You know, it was after becoming a mature manager, I certainly was always on the lookout for that. And I see that as an issue involving policing in our country, throughout the country. Whether you're in the Southwest or the Northeast or somewhere in the middle, homelessness looks a lot alike throughout the country. It's almost always involved with mental illness and drug addiction. Seldom is the only problem that the person doesn't have a house. So I've seen this play itself out over more than 40 years on various topics. You know, we don't like the gang problem in the area just west of downtown Los Angeles, what we call Rampart. Okay, you cops, you deal with it, you make it go away. Well, you know, we have an issue of resources and legal authority and all that. We don't care, you just make it go away. And the tendency among police officers say, you know, salute and say, yes, sir. And I saw my job is to often say, no, sir. If we don't have the authority to do something, we shouldn't do it. We should certainly never violate the law for some other purpose. And my message to political leaders and to the police officers are, that guy, that elected official is not going to bail you out after we arrest you for violating the law. They're not going to be giving you a different job after we have to fire you. So anyway, I don't want to belabor the point, but that is one area where I would ask the public for help. The best thing you can do to encourage good policing is to refrain from encouraging bad policing, you know, for some other purpose, even if you think it's an important one. I don't know if that's clear, that's too much inside baseball. It's clear to me, but I don't know whether it's clear to you.
Yeah, it's perfect. Thank you for that answer, Chief Diaz, and illuminating how sometimes police get put in the scenario of being asked to solve something that isn't something they can solve, and how that it's a very interesting scenario in that case. So just to kind of circle us back towards something we talked about at the beginning, and how you didn't necessarily see yourself or grow up wanting to become a police officer, but that ended up being the career that you pursued and had a good time doing. What advice would you give for anyone interested in a career in law enforcement, or what advice would you have for those people who maybe aren't considering law enforcement yet, but maybe might in the future?
Well, the first thing is I have a rule that I don't try to talk anybody into anything like that. The stakes are too high, and you know, if you have the makings of being a good police officer, you feel a calling. And by the way, some people feel a calling that shouldn't be called, you know, that because you need the calling, but you need some other things too. But I don't believe in convincing anybody to do it. what I would say, there's a whole lot, as you can tell by the way I talk, there's a whole lot that I would say to somebody who's just starting a career. And I might start with something that my dad said to me when I was 21 years old. Told him, yeah, I applied for the LAPD and all that. And he said something to me I've never heard before. He says, oh, you're going to be a policeman, huh? I said, yeah, I think so. He says, well, okay, make sure that you behave in such a way that the day you stop being a policeman, you don't have to leave town. And I'm proud of having fulfilled that recommendation of my dad's. I didn't leave, I stopped being chief and I didn't leave town. I have nothing that I'm ashamed of. And that is another aspect about policing. You have many opportunities to, and really in any job in public life, you have many opportunities to do things that you'll regret later. There are some things I would have done different in retrospect and all that, but I don't feel shame for any of it. And on the contrary, I'm very proud of my career. And I guess I would say that also to a young person, if you're considering this, no, it's it can be very rewarding. Like I've told other people, and this is a little bit gender specific, but for us men, quite often you get it to a certain age, you get into your 40s or 50s or so, and that famous midlife crisis thing strikes. And one of the symptoms of that is that people ask themselves, well, everything I've done with my life so far, does it mean anything? Did I make a difference and all that? And I tell people, you become a police officer and you do a good job at it, and you're faithful to the principles. You don't have to have that conversation with yourself. You don't have to ask yourself whether it was worth it or whether you made a difference or not. You made a difference.
I think that's one of the best answers I've ever heard on what advice would you give on this profession or this career. Usually people will talk about, you have this to look forward to, you have this, but the fact that you're so proud of what you've done and the fact that you, aren't ashamed of your work, I think is the best way to kind of prepare yourself as a role model for others who may be interested in the field now or in the future. I think that's one of the best ways that people can maybe look forward to the work and also understand if this is something for them, if this is something that if they're actually interested in doing, or if it's just something that was just a passing thought. So really thank you for that answer. I think that's a really, really great way to put it. I know we're getting close to time, so I want to end things off on looking towards the future. So I understand your new position as the External Relations Director for the Robert Presley Center of Crime and Justice Studies. Do you have any specific goals in mind in this new position?
Well, there's a few things. First of all, the definition of that position, the external director, what that really means, and there's two of us, by the way, Mike Ramos, who's a former district attorney in San Bernardino County. He's one of the external directors. I'm the other. So my job, in essence, is to be the liaison of the center to practitioners in Riverside County. Similarly, Mike is the liaison in San Bernardino County. I have reached out to the sheriff, the police chiefs, the probation department, the public defender's office, the district attorney's office, and we want to be that glue that brings the researchers and academics in the Presley Center together with the practitioners throughout our region. That's in general. More specifically, we've been working on, we want to roll out for next summer's quarter a series of Robert Presley internships, Robert Presley Center specific internships, where students in the center will have an opportunity over a couple of quarters to deal with, to be interns in different organizations in the two counties, different agencies. And the goal is to do some relatively high level stuff. We don't want our interns to be doing just go for duties or, menial work, but to be exposed to what those agencies do, to what the members of the agencies are involved with, give them some realistic views of what goes on in public agencies and in nonprofits in the region.
I think that's a really, really great way to end it. We talked so much about your past career and what the amazing things you accomplished, but it's great to hear about everything you're working about right now. And I'm sure our audience, especially our students, would be especially interested in any internship opportunities that the center is potentially thinking about. So thank you again, Chief Diaz, for joining us today. It was an honor to have you on, and I can't wait to share this episode with everyone.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Zeno.